Thank you. Yes, this paper is Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman and Mark Twain's How to Tell a Story. The presentation grows out of the work I presented at Quarry Farm in 2024 on Colonel Sellers as a crucial example of Twain's monetary imagination, a term I've developed to express the relationship between Twain's interest in money and his literary creativity. In that talk, I was particularly interested in how Twain's thinking about money impacted his fictive modes rather than adhering to a kind of realism. Twain, as Greg Camfield, who's here, which is great, employed a burlesque or satiric, allegorical, and melodrama as genres that invite different affective psychologies. Colonel Sellers seemed to me a clearinghouse of a character for almost any kind of financial scenario, and I wanted to demonstrate how he might serve to strain each of these generic potentialities. Underneath my inquiry lay another question. What economic theory or theories are best suited to understanding Twain or Mr. Clemens for that matter? Would such a theory allow me to connect Twain's money interests to his storytelling? And could I connect the monetary to the imaginative, as my term sort of promises in a certain way? So I also was thinking about, and I'll come back to this, why this quote, from Somerset Maugham's Cakes and Ale, which is generally purported to be a satire of Thomas Hardy and Hugh Walpole. But he has lots of interesting asides, and he has this one about American literature, or American discourse. He says, the Americans, who are the most efficient people on earth, have carried this device to such a height of perfection and have invented so wide a range of pithy and hackneyed phrases that they can carry on an amusing and animated conversation without giving a moment's reflection to what they are saying, and so leave their minds free to consider the more important matters of big business and fornication.
Isn't that a definition of AI?
You are opening up vistas there. Yeah. So I keep that in mind as we go here. I'm going to focus on how to tell a story here and how Kahneman's theories sort of interact with it. In Mark Twain and Money, Henry B. Wonham and Lawrence Howe refocus the understanding of the roles that money played in Twain's writing. They argue that Twain's contradictory attitudes and misguided enthusiasms provide an illuminating window on the complex and rapidly changing financial culture. And they call for scholars to pay more careful attention to ways such fiscal concerns animate his fiction. Toward this end, scholarship in this vein has sought to correlate and evaluate Twain's writing with classical economics, issues of capital and capitalism, socialism, democracy, and the generic and characterological plasticity of Colonel Sellers provides an indication of how deeply Twain's monetary thinking influenced questions of literary form, his literary scenarios and gambits, and his commitments to realism or more exaggerated modes of literary representation. This direction of research raises that question of what kind of economic thinking or theory is best suited to understanding Twain's writings in general and Colonel Sellers in particular. In working from this premise about Twain's monetary imagination, I am not asserting that Twain's thinking about money and economics bears no relation to classical economic theory, but as with his essay on political economy from 1870, he is not a systematic enough thinker to sustain such lines of inquiry for very long, and he knows it. In fact, he suspects that neither are most people capable of such sustained analysis, and yet modern culture demands that we act as economic agents. Thus, in his piece, the dutiful task of working through classical economic theories is overridden by the impulses of conspicuous consumption, in this case of lightning rods, and the electrical barrage that this leads to. Twain concludes the essay in a generally sort of fried condition, and he sort of gives us this idea that I didn't get to, basically I didn't get to actually write the economic theory. And this is a pattern in the kind of humor I'm going to be talking about, that idea of Jim Blaine and the goat, Grandpa's goat story, where you get to this moment of deferral, and in the wonderful Hal Holbrook version of it, you get this very long pause, and then you don't get it. And the same thing happens here, but instead of not getting it in silence, you get to whom it may concern. Parties having need of 3,211 feet of best quality zinc-plated spiral twist lightning rod stuff, and 1,631 silver tip points, all in tolerable repair, and though much worn by use, still equal to any ordinary emergency, can hear of bargains by addressing the publisher. This kind of disclaimer there, right? What began as an essay on political economy ends with the author taking a loss on a bad investment in 3,211 feet of lightning rod stuff. Indeed, the lightning rod is an apt allegorical figure for these transitions of genre: realism, burlesque, melodrama, and allegory all in one, as it is in its practical sense as both a stock example of an object that is both prudent and in the preservation of buildings, but also something of a con, trading on fear and its figurative senses, something that serves as a frequent target of criticism, focus of controversy, or something that diverts an attack from one target to another. So that idea of a lightning rod and this idea of lightning being diverted. One of Twain's famous sort of adages that I like is the difference between, the almost right word and the right word, difference between the lightning bug and lightning, meaning he wants power, that writing should be powerful. And this idea is sort of encoded in that piece. Underlying Twain's friction with classical economics lies his sense that it derives from the age of reason, and he was always interested in moments when the pretense of rationality is exposed to and by other psychologies, motives, and appetites. Rather than placing Twain in the context of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, or Karl Marx, as useful and illuminating as those comparisons are, I suggest that the economic theories of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky are perhaps the most relevant in a sense because they explore cognitive illusions, rational error, and the biases of choice in relation to all kinds of behavioral and psychological conditions, especially economic ones. In Kahneman's terms, as he lays them out in Thinking Fast and Slow, 2011, Tversky dies, and so I'm quoting Kahneman, even though their ideas are sort of born together in the 1990s. We might consider both Twain and Colonel Sellers, for there's considerable overlap in this regard between the historical personage and the authorial creation, and their shared monetary imagination as problems of fast and slow thinking. Kahneman's economic theories are rooted in social psychology and cognitive theory, in which two perceptual systems compete and regulate human judgment and behavior. In Kahneman's theory, there is fast automatic system of thinking, which he calls System 1. It functions largely unconsciously and is relatively undemanding of computational capacity. As a form of attention, it requires little or no effort, and in the examples that Kahneman uses, involves the ability to immediately read the intentions of others through facial expression, to be fooled by optical illusions through depth perception cues, such as the Muller-Lyer illusion, and it allows you to perform routine tasks or recognize stereotypical behaviors. System 2 is associated with challenging analytical or physical tasks that necessitate concentration or focus. Kahneman offers examples that range from maintaining a faster than normal pace while walking, monitoring appropriate behavior in social situations, to solving math problems or checking the validity of complex logical argument. Kahneman is particularly interested in the ways in which these systems interact, especially when they produce biases or errors in reasoning. Often a System 1 response will cue System 2 to concentrate. At other times, the cognitive self-consciousness of slow thinking is overridden by the immediacy of fast-thinking reactions. There are many interesting correlations between Kahneman's theories and some of the most powerful moments in Twain's writings. For example, Kahneman discusses advancements in the understanding of the psychological phenomenon known as a priming effect, a mechanism of association in which subjects are influenced, frequently unconsciously, by words, gestures, ideas, or tasks. In one experiment, the priming process was shown to be reciprocal in terms of our emotions, as test subjects who were smiling found cartoons funnier than those who were frowning. And he asked them to put a pencil this way and then this way in their mouth to create the sort of physical ideas. And it's almost like something out of Edgar Allan Poe's The Purloined Letter, where it's like facial expressions trigger certain subliminal kinds of reactions to things. They reveal surprisingly how System 2, which as Kahneman points out, believes it is in charge and that it knows the reasons for its choices, is susceptible to small automatic cues picked up unconsciously by System 1. Priming effects are precisely what Twain discussed in How to Tell a Story, 1897. His taxonomy of the American humorous story as distinct from the comic story, which he associates with the English or the witty story, or the witty story, which he associates with the French. The key distinction has to do with an element of misdirection in the manner in which it is told. All three forms, in a sense, prime the listener that what is coming might be funny, but whereas in the European forms, the teller impresses upon the audience that he knows it is funny. In the American form, as Twain says, the teller does his best to conceal the fact that he even dimly suspects that there is anything funny about it, unquote. This allows for a greater latitude in the comic structure. The humorous story can be rambling and disjointed. The punchline, or nub, as he refers to it, may arrive in a deceptively casual manner with the pretense that the teller does not know it is a nub. In other words, a joke created by System 2 presents itself in the guise of System 1, discourse, and the humor arises in apparently effortless fashion. By playing dumb in these ways, the rambling narrative, slurring of the point, and of the studied remark dropped innocently as if thinking aloud, the American humorous storyteller primes his audience. This mode creates the expectation of a joke since the audience has come inevitably to hear something funny, only to have it land in an unexpected way. Thus, the humorous storyteller reveals the unconscious listening habits of the audience and manipulates them accordingly. As if to show that the psychological mechanism at work in the priming effects of this storytelling mode is actually independent of joke work per se, Twain famously concludes his essay with a representation of an African-American ghost story, The Golden Arm, which of course we know is probably the oldest story he ever knew or committed to memory, and one of the most repeated things. He often closed most of his lectures with it, and there's a lot more that could be said about the choices of that story and why. But what I want to focus on right now is that he uses, of course, fear as the issue, not just jokes or laughter as the provocation. One aim of the story is to frighten a susceptible member of the audience. An impressible girl was Twain's standard target, Susie, by pausing dramatically at the end and directly accusing his farthest gone auditor, as he says, until she gives a yelp and springs right out of her shoes. But Twain cautions, you must get the pause right. The performative art of the pause, then, from the targeting of the relatively naive or least self-conscious individual, which is gendered for Twain, to its dramatic duration becomes, in Kahneman's terms, the harnessing of System 2 to trigger System 1 effects. How to Tell a Story reveals itself to be not only Twain's defense of an oral tradition he deems an American cultural art form, but it also recognizes the psychological and behavioral mechanisms at work in the form. In selecting a good target for his surprise, the humorous storyteller is actually engaging his own System 1 by gauging the reactions of listeners to the extent to which they have been primed as he builds to the pause. Through Kahneman's lens, we begin to appreciate how Twain's meta-narrative analysis approaches metacognitive behavioral psychology. Getting the pause right requires great effort. Twain concludes that it is the most troublesome and aggravating and uncertain thing you ever undertook. And in fact, he has his whole family engaged in timing his pauses as he's going on tour and seeing which of them is effective or not. Sometimes he even resorts to dimming the lights at the very end to try and create this sort of moment. And one can appreciate the effortful quality of such system 2 type concentration. Indeed, Twain's characters frequently arrive at hard-won realizations derived from slow thinking processes. All right then, I'll go to hell, and I tore it up. Huck famously says, right? In making the case for this American art form of playing the rube as a secret form of effort, timing, and skill, Twain articulates something about American identity and its psychodynamics that goes beyond the fundamental idea of presenting an American as quintessentially lacking cultivation, which had been a hallmark of Southwestern and Western humor. If the tall tale used exaggeration to tease out the lines between credulity and disbelief, Twain made the case for the art of artlessness, that there was a psychology as taxing as it was tacit at work in American storytelling. A linguistic invention that, as Somerset Maugham observed, contains a wide range of pithy and hackneyed phrases that they can carry on an amusing and animated conversation without giving a moment's reflection to what they are saying, and so leave their minds free to consider the more important matters. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to stop here, but if we can, in discussion, I have an example from Colonel Sellers where you see in the Gilded Age this very technique and process now being delivered over to the processes of the sales pitch, business, and speculation. But thank you for your attention.